What's up, everybody? Welcome back. This is Rabid, and we are summarizing Module 2 of Course 2 of the Real Estate Salesperson program in Humber. So let's not waste any time and let's get right to it. Lesson 1, we're going to click on it and go straight to the summary because that's what we want to do right now. So let's to summarize lesson 1, module 2. Let's read the summary. Obligations of a registrant regarding documenting a relationship. As a salesperson, your regulatory obligations for documenting a relationship include providing information to a seller or buyer describing the nature of services that would provide before entering into an agreement. Clarifying and documenting relationship as early as possible is the best way to avoid misunderstandings. Explaining the minimum content included in the agreement, including the effective date and expiry date of the agreement, and the method of remuneration payable to the brokerage. Reducing all agreements to writing before an offer is made, signing the agreement on behalf of the brokerage and presenting it to the seller or the buyer for signature. A seller or a buyer is not obligated to sign. Providing written copies of the agreement to all parties involved immediately after signing. If the agreement is communicated electronically, receipt of the electronic copy constitutes receipt of the agreement. Ensuring forms used by the brokerage comply with Section 34 of the Code of Ethics. And then they talk about the obligation of a registrant regarding remuneration and other financial disclosures. Your regulatory obligation regarding remuneration and other financial disclosures include calculating remuneration in a manner permitted by REBA, disclosing a direct or indirect interest. What is an indirect interest? An interest can be any benefit that a registrant may gain now or in the future from a transaction beyond the remuneration that may or may not stand to earn on the transaction. Examples of an indirect interest is when a relative of the registrant is the buyer or seller, or when a registrant or their relative is a shareholder of the company that is buying or selling. Makes sense. Okay. In disclosing when the brokerage has an agreement with more than one seller and buyer for remuneration for the same trade, not indicating that remuneration is fixed or approved by the law, RICO, or any other government entity. Informing the buyer client of all properties meeting the client's criteria regardless of remuneration involved. Not claiming remuneration from the seller for a trade if the brokerage knows that there is an unexpired listing agreement with another brokerage. And then they talk about obligations of a registrant regarding disclosure requirements relating to relationships. As a salesperson, your regulatory obligations regarding disclosure requirements relating to relationships with a seller and a buyer include disclosing the possibility of multiple representation, disclosing before multiple representation occurs, avoiding inaccurate representation of services being provided, and having insurance. Obligations of a seller. A seller's legal obligations include indemnification, remuneration, any other obligation that may be contained in the agreement. These obligations apply only to seller clients. A seller customer's legal obligations are limited to only what they specifically agreed to as part of their agreement with the brokerage. Obligations of a buyer. Same thing, indemnification, remuneration, and any other obligation that may be contained in the agreement. These obligations apply only to buyer clients. A buyer customer's legal obligations are limited to only what they specifically agreed to as part of their agreement with the brokerage. So this was lesson 1 of module 2, course 2. I think we have time to do lesson 2. Let's do it. A seller representation agreement. We're going to skip all the way to the end. Oh my goodness, 57 pages of lesson 2. Good luck. I had a hard time reading all that, but good luck to you. Summarization of lesson 2. Types of listing. How a seller representation agreement is drafted depends on the type of listing that the seller opts for. There are three types of listings: exclusive, open, and listing service. In an exclusive listing, the seller gives the sole right to market and sell their property to one brokerage. Normally, a seller and a brokerage agree to an exclusive listing because the seller has given specific instructions regarding the showing of the property. An open listing is one where a seller does not list their property with any brokerage, but will allow any brokerage to show the property to a buyer. The seller will cooperate with the brokerage and compensate the one that secures them the most satisfactory offer. A listing service is a member-only database that provides access to properties that are available for sale and or lease. Terms of and parties to a seller representation agreement. Important terms of and parties to a seller representation agreement, such as the type of listing agreement, seller details, brokerage details, address details, commencement and termination dates, listing price, 6-month provision, and seller's warranty should be included in every seller representation agreement. Additional information typically included in a seller representation. Every seller representation agreement lists the obligations of a seller and a listing brokerage and services that the listing brokerage will provide. Provisions included in every seller representation agreement include definitions and interpretations, remuneration, representation, finder's fee, referrals of inquiries, marketing, warranty, indemnification and insurance, Family Law Act, verification of information, use and distribution of information, successors and assigns, conflict or discrepancy, electronic communication, electronic signatures, and schedules. These were some of the provisions. Signing and initializing requirements in a typical seller representation agreement are as follows: signatures from the seller and the listing brokerage, signatures for spousal consent, a declaration of insurance by the salesperson, the seller's initial on each page of the agreement, and an acknowledgement by the seller that they understand the terms and have received a true copy of the agreement. Documenting remuneration in a seller's agreement. The amount of remuneration owed is negotiable between the seller and the brokerage and is based on the services being provided by the brokerage under the agreement. REBA identifies the allowable way remuneration can be calculated. The holdover provision in a seller's representation agreement protects the rights of the brokerage, wherein if a buyer is introduced to a property during the listing period and they purchase a property after the expiry of the listing during an identified time, a seller will owe remuneration to the brokerage. So that was lesson 2, module 2. So that's pretty much it for today. I'm going to do lesson 3 for tomorrow and hopefully get this done soon. Thank you so much. Hope you like this video. Alright, good night.